Good morning. I believe you heard that we are recording this, just so everyone knows. My name is Kate Whites. I am the founder and director of the Common Sensus Festival, and I am thrilled to welcome you all to our first, what is a brand new program that we're calling Believe in Science. And you're probably wondering why is Common Sensus an arts festival doing something called Believe in Science? Well, I'll just reiterate our mission, which is the mission of Common Sensus is to explore and celebrate the uniqueness and commonalities of all of humanity with a focus on arts, science, and disability acceptance. Vaccines, I think, really fit into our mission, at least as far as discussions as part of disability acceptance and disability justice. And while I'd love to sit here and talk to you directly about vaccines all day, I took geology in college. So I think it's probably more important to have an expert come in and speak to us. Today, I want to give a welcome to Dr. Ali Khan. He is the Dean of the College of Public Health at University of Nebraska Medical Center. He's an expert in epidemiology, was 25 years at the CDC, and was also the Assistant Surgeon General for years as well. And one thing that I do want to bring up that I did speak with Ali about just a second ago, before all these amazing credentials all over the world that he's done, he started as a pediatrician and an internalist. So children are definitely near and dear to his heart. So I think this is important to bring up. Dr. Khan, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to chat with you.
Wonderful. Well, I'll just tell everyone, Dr. Khan has a few slides just to kind of go over vaccines in general, to give us some education. And I think we'll move on to where we are in the state of our country as far as vaccines, particularly the MMR vaccine and autism and measles and all the things. And then it's my hope as you're walking away today, because I have a feeling that you all are probably in similar. Maybe you aren't. Maybe I shouldn't make assumptions, but I was just assuming that we're probably preaching to the choir as far as the importance of vaccines in our society. And hopefully we can walk away with some tools to how to move forward with better information in the world. Also, at the end, you'll have an opportunity to ask Dr. Khan some questions. We ask that you put it in the chat, and then our wizards behind the scenes will feed me some questions to give to Dr. Khan. Hello, Ali. Welcome. Again, we've known each other for a while. This is fun. I've never done anything like this with you. So,
I'm excited about our conversation and to make sure that we have lots of time for conversation and a lot of time, I hope, for questions too, from all of these amazing people that you've brought together. What I thought I would start off with very briefly is a couple of quick set of slides, which is a primer on immunology and vaccinology. And actually the main point I want to make is about how common sense this science is. So you don't need your PhD in immunology to really understand the basics of vaccines. If you would allow me, and please tell me if my screen share is working, if I get a thumbs up for a screen share. Perfect.
got
Thank you
it.
very much. I always start with thank yous as opposed to end with them. And I want to thank Alexander Todd, who's our public health policy analyst and an amazing alum of the university who helps put these together for me. What I'm going to tell you, origin of vaccines, vaccines as medical miracles, and then how we protect our communities. So I'll give you a little snapshot, an overview of what I'm going to talk about. You've probably already figured out I'm from New York. I talk really fast. My guess is you listen really fast too. But my students know, and please don't hesitate. It's only 20, 30 people to say, Ollie, slow down. I'm glad to slow down. Because again, this isn't about just presenting this at you. This is about making sure that we do have a dialogue. So this is where traditionally people start at when they talk about the history of vaccines. And they talk about this story about Edward Jenner. He recognized that milkmaids who were unlikely to get smallpox. And his theory was it's well because they get infected with cowpox from the teats of cows. And so that protects them and they have this lovely fair complexion, right? This is the background to this story. And so without any IRB approval, he basically takes some cowpox lesions from a dairy maid and inoculates good old James Phipps, our lovely hero of this story. And then again, Jenner goes ahead and exposes him to smallpox. And this young kid does not develop smallpox. Okay. So there you go. This is the canon of vaccinology and the foundation essentially of modern vaccinology, and this treatment quickly spread to England and most European countries. I say this as this isn't the whole story, right? And so and it's about common sense public health. So the reason I even thought about this was because people knew for a very long time that if you got smallpox, you didn't get it again, right? And because it's 100% immunity. And
Mhm.
because people knew this, when it was time to take care of people with smallpox, they looked for somebody who had already survived the disease, right? So again, thousands of years ago, before anybody knew what immunology was, they knew, wait, I have somebody with smallpox. I need to find somebody who had smallpox to take care of them because they won't get infected. And the history of vaccinology is so much older and more robust than our lovely Mr. Edward Jenner, right? Edward Jenner just sort of brought it into modern times. And over 1,000, I guess this would be 3,000 years ago in China. So when you get smallpox, you get these pustules and then they scab over. So 3,000 years ago, people will take these scabs, crush them up, and blow them up their nose, right? That's the word insufflation, right? And they would blow it up their nose to try to cause a mild case of smallpox that would protect you from a severe case of smallpox, right? So this is immunology in action 3,000 years ago. And then that just goes on and on. China, once we started getting into the Middle East, instead of blowing up in your nose, what they would do is they would take these scabs and they would sort of dab them with a needle or scratch them into your arm to try to get you a mild case of smallpox. And we already have this wonderful story of Lady Mary Wortley, who recognized that the Turks were doing this and came back into the UK in Boston and said, look, they're already doing this in the Middle East. We need to be doing this here in the Western world to help protect us from what is a very severe disease. And then before I transition, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about misinformation and disinformation, so this was right after Edward Jenner and his lovely cowpox. This was a parody about, oh my gosh, if we start inoculating ourselves with cowpox, we're going to become cows. And so this was DNA integration 400 years ago. Okay.
Well, before the internet, yes.
Well before the internet.
Yeah.
So misinformation was well before the internet. And that's important to understand, right? This isn't a new phenomenon. I've told you about Edward Jenner, and then I'm going to now skip ahead 60, 70 years to Louis Pasteur. The reason I'm in medicine is because of this man. And so the interesting thing is, and the why I call this common sense public health or infectious diseases is this is the guy who actually created germ theory, right? This is the guy who proved there are these things that called germs that make us sick, and then he used that knowledge to help develop additional vaccines against cholera, anthrax, and rabies. So again, 3,000 years before anybody knew what germ theory was, right? Infections causing disease, there's an immune system. We were already using the knowledge to protect our kids from a severe disease. Okay, so I just want to make that point about how common sense this was. And then Louis Pasteur led to many heroes after him. I don't know if he was Catholic, but this man needs to be a saint, right? So this is Jonas Salk. You in this audience are too young to remember, but your parents would remember a time when you didn't send your kids out in the summer because you were so scared of them getting polio, right? We had wards of iron lungs in the United States. And this man fixed this by taking poliovirus and converting it into a version that was milder. And in those days, amazing to do a study of 2 million kids who got vaccine and who didn't get vaccine. So classic, study to prove that poliovirus vaccine worked. And this was truly a miracle. And in top of that, this is a man who decided that he wasn't going to patent the vaccine. And this is something that should go, I think, is on his tombstone, which could you patent the sun, right? He was saving lives. And why would you patent saving lives? So, again, a miracle. And this is what happened to polio cases. So this is what's called an epidemiologic curve. And so what you have is number of cases on the left side on that axis, and then on the bottom you have time. And so you can see once we started vaccinating people 1955, 1960, boom, polio disappeared and
Mhm.
polio deaths disappeared, right? And this, I could show you this again and again for every introduction of vaccine we've done in the United States and worldwide, what happens after you start vaccinating people. All right, so that was a quick little history lesson of common sense public health. Here's a quick little few points on the measles vaccine, and I have lots of slides of measles vaccines that I'm going to hold back because I'd rather have the conversation with you about the vaccine and side effects, known side effects, and what those happen to be, and complications of measles itself. So this is Dr. John Enders, and over 60 years ago, he created a vaccine for a disease that essentially infects everyone. So measles is the most contagious virus on the face of the planet, right? So if we have a special way to characterize that. It's called a reproductive number, which means if you take a room full of people who are not immune, how many will get infected? So for measles, it's about 12 to 18 will get infected, right? And so if you think about SARS-CoV-2, it's usually like 2 to 3. Maybe the Omicron variant got up to 8 at some point, which was super, but nothing approaches measles vaccine. It is the most infectious disease we know. Every kid gets it. Nobody gets spared because it's so infectious. It's because it's so infectious. Let's see. So he develops the vaccine, and lots of people survive. And I'll talk about how you develop vaccines in a minute. But this is the man, and this is actually it's called the Enders Edmondson strain, which is the vaccine you get today. That's the little virus piece in it, which is an attenuated virus. This is 1 minute long. I like to show this because it's like all of vaccinology in one slide.
Vaccines. How do vaccines
Can you hear this?
Huh? By giving extreme pain? Not at all. Vaccines train our body to fight against the dangerous disease-causing pathogens. Oh, really? Do they have a training academy? Oh, you are just unbelievable. Huh? Vaccines often contain weakened or dead pathogens. When they are injected into our body, they just trigger the immune response, but do not cause fully fledged diseases. Our immune cells recognize these pathogens as foreign invaders and thus produce antibodies. These antibodies kill the pathogens. Also, the immune cells record the information about the pathogens and the way they were killed. Hence, in case in the future, a similar strong pathogen enters our body, our immune cells remember and easily identify that pathogen. They produce the required antibodies to fight it back. Thus, we remain healthy.
There you go. 4 years of med school in 1 minute, if I only knew. So there's numbers of ways to produce vaccines, right? The oldest way is you just kill something, and then a virus, a bacteria, you throw it into your body, and your body goes, oh, these are all the pieces of that pathogen. Let me make antibodies against them. And then when you get infected with the real disease, the live microbe, the antibodies come in and say, okay, good to go. A little bit more sophisticated way, which is essentially which is what Edward Jenner did, and what Enders did with the measles vaccine, is they go, wait, can we make a milder version of this so you get like a teeny tiny infection, right? But you don't get really sick and die, right? We're not we're not in the dying business here. Like we like to eliminate as much dying as possible, as I tell people. So that's the attenuated vaccines. Then as you move into modern technology, you go, well, you know what? Let me just find that little item that's going to give you a good immune response. And part of that is about minimizing all the side effects you get from having all of these sort of like dead pieces of virus in your body, right? That you're trying to make an immune response. So you go, this is the piece that I need to have a good immune response to be protected. And so then you start getting subunit vaccines, right? And you go, okay, this is just a little tiny piece, like your influenza vaccine is a subunit vaccine. We know that we need to develop little antibodies against what's called the certain types of pieces on the surface of the influenza virus. You go, oh, okay, here's the piece. Just do that. We don't need to throw the whole influenza virus into you. And then the newest technology, which is also miraculous, is the nucleic acid vaccines. And in this case, instead of you throwing the little piece that you need to make the immune response to, we tell your own immune system, why don't you just make that own little piece and develop your own immune response to that little piece, right? So it's all about training your immune system. And I think I have a quote here I use these days. So when the best, and I, this is the best way to explain to anybody about vaccines, I hope, and you can tell me if I need to refine this. I say it's about training your immune system to protect you from deadly germs without the whole suffering and dying part. Okay. And so when somebody says, how do vaccines work? I go, this is how they work. They train your immune system without the whole suffering and dying part, right? Without a doubt, vaccines are a medical miracle. This is somebody with smallpox. This is something you have never seen, right? Since the 1970s. And the reasons you've never seen this is because of vaccines, right? The first disease we've eradicated, completely disappeared across the face of the planet because of vaccines. The only way we got there. There's no other way that this disappeared. And this isn't the only, so that may be the only one disease that we've eradicated, but we're working on elimination on other diseases currently, polio being an example. I just came back from Jordan where I sit on the technical advisory group for polio eradication. We've got it all eliminated in every country except for two, and we're going to try to get that one done soon too. Okay. And then there's lots of these other vaccines. I don't need to read them to you. You can read them faster than I can, that have also allow us to decrease the number who are doing that suffering and dying part from these diseases. And we call these vaccine preventable diseases. That may be a term you'll hear a lot. Vaccine preventable, VPDs is a term that we use. Okay, so this slide breaks every rule of slides. It's too busy, but it's valuable to make the one point I want to make, which is if you look down the center of these cases and deaths, you see 100%, 100% reduction, 100% reduction, 100% reduction cases and deaths. And so this slide doesn't break that rule because it's got one message, which is vaccines have allowed us to dramatically decrease cases and deaths of diseases in the United States and worldwide, right? And so you don't need to, you can read through all of them if you'd like to, but just to make that point of how miraculous these agents have been in helping us protect our kids and letting them to get past year one and move on through on to adulthood. This looks like 50 years of data of the total number of lives that have been saved by childhood vaccination. The number one should not surprise you, hopefully, based on what I told you, which is measles being the most infectious disease in the world. Everybody gets it, and it's deadly. So we've probably in the last 50 years saved about 100 million kids from dying from measles. And it's not just about saving lives. This is also about saving money. This is your own data from the good CDC that looked at the economic health and economic burden over 30 years of kids getting vaccinated here in the United States. And they said over those 30 years, and this data ends in 2023, over 500,000 illnesses were prevented, 30,000 hospitalizations, 1,000 deaths. And then you can look here in many ways at the millions and billions of dollars. So the societal net savings is 2.6, actually $2.6 trillion of how much money we have saved. Because remember, people when they get sick, hospitalization costs, they die, they have implications on society, on their families, et cetera, and long-term complications. So they not just save lives, they save money. So this is one of the best public health interventions we have available to us. Let me transition to my last couple of slides here before we have a conversation. I also like to remind people that when we get vaccinated, and I actually used this slide for a talk I gave at a church the other week about getting vaccinated is part of loving your neighbor, because it's not just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting your community. And so there's certain people who can't get vaccinated, right? The individual with cancer, somebody who's just had their lung heart transplant, pregnant women, right? If you think about live vaccines. And so for those people who can't get vaccinated, they are trusting everybody else in the community to be vaccinated to protect them, right? So by you protecting yourself, it's an act of generosity towards your community to help protect your community for people who can't protect themselves because of their immune status, for whatever reason that may be. And this concept is called herd immunity, right? So the more people that are protected in a community, the less likely a disease is to spread in a community. And because measles, here again, I show you that measles being the most infectious disease in the world, because it's the most infectious disease, you need the most people protected to help prevent it. My mentor, Bill Bellini, used to tell me that if there was one person left in the world uninfected with measles, measles would find him, right? It's highly infectious. It's infectious in the air, it's infectious on surfaces. We have cases of people coming into a room half an hour later and getting infected, right? It's a very infectious virus.
Ali, can I ask you just quickly about herd immunity, but also
Yes,
with
of course.
the effectiveness of vaccines? So, like the measles vaccine,
Yes.
it's in the mid to high 90s in terms of its.
So in the United States and worldwide, we usually get 2 doses of measles vaccine. We get one dose between 12 and 15 months, and that's 93% effective. And we get our second dose somewhere between 4 and 6 years, and that takes our effectiveness up to about 97 to 98%. And probably getting infected with measles is 99.99% effective. So
Okay.
vaccines, measles vaccines, pretty good at 97 to 98% effective. And it's probably one of the most effective vaccines we have. Flu is probably 40% effective, if
Hmm.
that, right? So I still will tell you to get vaccinated against flu. I'll take 40 over 0. But measles is a very, very effective vaccine. Now, unfortunately, despite it being very effective, and we can talk a little bit more about how safe the vaccine is, there has been a push in the United States mainly that has spilled over to a number of Western countries about misinformation and disinformation about vaccines in general. And a lot of it actually targeted on measles vaccine. And I know Kate wants to have a nice conversation about that. And she has her own experience and anecdotes to share with you on why that vaccine may well have been picked and targeted by this anti-vaccine contingent. But not vaccinating kids has consequences, right? And so if you look on the right, and I like this pictorial because it's every state of the union, and depending on how dark blue it is, how many cases of measles they've had, right? And so what you notice is starting in the 60s, so we started vaccinating people in 1963. So when we started vaccinating people and then moving into what is now used as the MMR vaccine, you see sort of that blue going away, going away, going away. By the 1980s, when vaccines were mandated, so we have school mandates for vaccines. But in the 1980s, people said, well, you know what? If you want to go to school, you need to start getting vaccinated against measles. This just drops off. And by 2000, in 2000, measles was eliminated in the United States, which meant that 25 years ago, we no longer had our own measles in this country. Yes, people came in from abroad with measles, right? That of course happens. We have people who travel, so you would maybe go off somewhere to Israel or the Netherlands and come back with measles, but we didn't have any of our own measles anymore, right? This was all imported cases. Unfortunately, as the left slide will show you, that has changed as of the last year, right? So now we now have our own sustained measles cases here in the United States that no longer are untethered to somebody from abroad bringing it in or importing it into it. This is our own native measles. And although WHO, the committee that makes these determinations, will not meet until this fall, by definition, the US has lost its measles elimination status as of February of this year because they went 1 year with their own measles without getting rid of it. And last year was extraordinary. We had 3 people die with measles in the United States. We had about 3,000 cases, 3 people died, which makes about sense. In today's modern era with better nutrition, there's probably about 1 per 1,000 that dies with measles. But it's probably been over 30, 40 years ago when we've had 3 people die with measles in the United States, right? So the vaccine has been extremely efficacious. But unfortunately, there remain pockets of people who are unvaccinated in the United States, and the disease tends to spread in those pockets of people who are unvaccinated for the most part. That is where most disease occurs. However, as I told you, because the vaccine is 97% effective, you will occasionally get a vaccinated person. If you take a fully vaccinated person with measles and you put enough people with measles around them, you will get what's called breakthrough infection. So we do get a handful of people who are vaccinated, but I believe the data is 90 to 95% of all the cases we're seeing in the US now are just unvaccinated, kids who just did not get vaccinated. And I'm going to stop there. Now, Kate, if you'd like, we can start a conversation now, but I have all sorts of stuff that I can talk about later about vaccines being safe, etc. We can take this wherever. It's yours. We'll take this wherever you want
Okay.
now. And you have this amazing audience here of 20 people. Whatever questions and comments they have, we can get into it.
Perfect. Well, thank you. You do speak fast, but I followed. Thank you.
Okay,
I
thank
hope
you.
I hope everybody else did too. But yeah, I do want to specifically hone in on the MMR vaccine and reluctance for folks to be getting that particular vaccine and the reasons behind it, at least within the last 20 years. And I know that you have slides and I know you can speak to it, but first and foremost, I'll just ask you, does the MMR vaccine cause autism?
No, the MMR vaccine does not cause autism. There have been numerous studies worldwide, not just here in the United States, that say it does not cause autism, right? And the only one study that has ever said it does not cause autism was with 12 people, I
12
believe.
people.
12
Yeah.
people, and it was retracted. And I think you have a lot more details on this fraudulent Wakefield, but that is the only in this ocean of data that says it does not cause autism. We have this one retracted study of 12 people that said it caused autism.
So, as far as academia is concerned, 12 people in one study, that's pretty ridiculous, correct? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Compared to
Um,
the millions of other people we have tested to say it does not cause autism.
or even just the polio vaccine, where he had 2 million children versus 12, right? 12
Yes,
folks that, yes, of course.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
So, what Dr. Khan is alluding to is Andrew Wakefield. He was at the time a doctor. He is no longer a doctor. He was stripped of all of his licenses, but he pushed this out roughly 20 years ago. And because autism was not at the rates that it is now, certainly in our country, but then also in the UK, because Dr. Andrew Wakefield is from the UK, this just blew up. The international press got a hold of it. And then there were multiple celebrities that also were pushing this false narrative. Jenny McCarthy was one of them. The damage, once someone gets it in their brain, they won't let it go. I've met individuals that have now multiple kids on the spectrum. They didn't vaccinate their first child because they were afraid that they would get autism and then, or develop autism, I should say, and then ended up having their children diagnosed after the fact anyway, not even getting vaccinated, and ended up getting pertussis as a baby, which is terrible. I had pertussis, my vaccine wore off in my 20s. That was terrible. And so I think that's just one of the biggest reasons why folks still believe that the MMR vaccine causes autism. But can you speak a little bit about what's happening developmentally in a child when they would say get the second MMR vaccine shot?
I think the best way to explain that was from one of my mentors, Bob Weiss, who said, Ali, everybody who has died of a foodborne illness. And I go, that makes no sense at all. And he goes, Ali, epidemiologically, everybody who has died had a meal before they died. And I go, well, yes, of course they ate before they died. I mean, at some point before, and he goes, there you go. Epidemiologically, all deaths are foodborne illness. And so I know it's humorous, but it makes the point about why you would link vaccinations with autism if you think about it from a timing standpoint, right? So when are children diagnosed with autism? So it depends on the nature of the autism. Some kids get diagnosed early within the first 6 to 12 months because people recognize that they don't have sort of social smiling. Others kids start getting recognized around 12 to 15. So I think that's called in you all are better experts than I am on this, sort of the classical autism, right? But then there's a plateauing autism where the kids seem to be, at least from a motor standpoint, doing okay, and then they sort of start plateauing around 12 to 15 months of age, which is when we start recommending developmental screening. And then there's some kids who seem to be doing fine out to about 12 to 15, and then they may actually start showing some regression.
Regression.
Right? I think that's about a quarter of kids in that sort of that regression in that regression group. So those kids are getting diagnosed somewhere between 15 and 24 months of age. Right? And then we do have a cohort that gets diagnosed much later, who are much better at masking their symptoms, understanding social cues, but then they come across an extremely complex social environment. It's harder and harder to hide your symptoms, right? So when the bulk of individuals are getting diagnosed somewhere between 6 and 24 months of age, you go, well, what else is going on at 6 to 24 months of age? Vaccinations are going on at 6 and 24 months of age. And so it's very easy to understand why parents looking for a reason for why their child has autism would sort of latch onto vaccines, because temporally in your mind it makes sense, right? That the kid seemed to be doing fine, is no longer doing fine, and it must be due to the vaccine. So there's without a doubt that temporal association exists. And this is why we have so many studies to prove that, yes, while it's happening temporarily, so yes, you did have a last meal, it wasn't the meal that caused your death, right? And so it wasn't the autism that caused your death. But it's very easy to understand why you would link vaccinations with autism.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I didn't make that leap, but I do have the experience of having my child diagnosed, and you're trying to figure out what's going on and what has happened. And depending on your desperation or how upset you are, you're grasping at really anything you can find. So it certainly makes sense to me. Let me ask you this. So hypothetically, say someone does not get their children vaccinated and they come down with the measles or the mumps or rubella or one of the other vaccine preventable diseases that you showed us earlier. What does it mean at onset? We can say measles since it is so contagious at onset, but then what can happen later in life?
Sure. Glad to talk about that. I get to see a spectrum of people in our society in my Twitter feed. And I have all these people who tell me, measles, it's just a rash illness, nothing to worry about. Go listen to the Brady Brunch. They'll tell you how to practice medicine, right? Because an episode there apparently about measles is not a big deal. And they put it off to, well, we're nutritionally in a much better state we are now than we were in the, which is without a doubt, absolutely. But I'd like to go back to the 1960s with you. I don't think there were starving kids in America in the 1960s, okay? I think nutritionally, socially, from a sanitation standpoint, our kids were in a good place. And in the 1960s, before we started vaccinating kids with measles, we had every year about 400 to 500 deaths. Okay,
Mm.
so that's what the expectation should be in a society like ours that has good nutrition, that has good sanitation, that if we stop vaccinating kids, that's how many deaths we would see. We had about 1,000 cases a year. So what the main complication of measles is, it causes a pneumonia, right? So it causes a viral pneumonia, and we used to have about 150,000 cases of viral pneumonia in the what then I think was 3 to 4 million kids a year getting measles. They also get encephalitis, right? So
Mhm.
about 1,000 kids every year would get the virus going up to their brain, and that one
Is that
really
like a
worries.
that's a swelling of the brain?
Swelling, right? The inflammation of the brain, and that one really works. So the pneumonia is usually what killed you. The inflammation is usually what caused long-term complications, including blindness. Was measles was one of the leading causes of blindness, remains so in many parts of the world. It's one of the reasons we give vitamin A is to try to prevent that complication of measles. Vaccine, about 10% had some inner ear complications. A few of those went on to develop deafness. And then the most scary complication was that if it was in your brain, it would stay in your brain. And 5 to 7 years later, you would get this sort of inflammatory disease in your brain that was 100% fatal. And we
Wow.
called that sclerosing panencephalitis. And that's disappeared. We got rid of that with vaccination. That doesn't happen. But that was something that really scared parents, because even if your kid survived the measles, you had no way to know that it had lodged in the brain. And maybe a decade later, all of a sudden, this kid was going to get what was essentially a 100% fatal disease. So do not believe anybody who tells you measles is just a rash. Right?
Mhm.
Measles is a severe illness. We have hundreds of thousands who still die all over the world from measles vaccine. And now I can just tell you, look at the United States. Well, last year, 3 kids died from measles. And we are trying to pull the data. Actually, one of our studies we're trying to do right now, and this is hard to do because of the way we collect data in the United States, unfortunately, is how many kids in the US actually have been hospitalized with measles, how many have had pneumonia, and how many had encephalitis. So we're going to try to do what we can to cobble data together here in the US to continue to remind people it's more than a rash illness.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason I wanted to ask this, not only are you risking just a very bad disease that you're talking about, that it's not just a rash, but your child could die, your child could end up blind, your child could end up deaf. Inner ear is vestibular issues that could be balanced, that could be all kinds of things, right? So what is this ableist notion that you're afraid that your child is going to be diagnosed with autism, but yet you're putting their life on the line, literally, and risking disability in the long term and certain death, depending on what they develop 5 to 7 years later. So I think that's just one of the main points I wanted to make. I'm not glossing over autism. I'm not saying it's not, difficult for parents. It's certainly difficult for me, but my child's alive, right? And hopefully will be for a very long time. So thank you so much for kind of talking about what can happen should you contract the measles. I had one very scientific question that I can't answer. When we're talking about the individuals that cannot get the traditional vaccines, and this is many people in the disability community, cannot put even a defunct virus in their system because they could end up being sick. And then also the folks that you showed in your slides. So pregnant women, people going through cancer, people with heart issues. Is there a point where science could catch up and everything could be a nucleic acid vaccine? So eventually maybe 100% of people could get vaccines should they choose.
Correct. So the main issue remains around these live attenuated vaccines, like measles is a live attenuated vaccine. And you're correct. If we can get the immunology right, you don't even need to go to mRNA technology, even if you went to a subunit vaccine or a killed vaccine component, if you could get that far. The trouble is these are complex microbes, right? And it's not easy to figure out what is that piece that we need for you to develop a good immune response. So, for example, we already talked about influenza. Why do we not have 90% efficacy with flu viruses? It's just we have not understood the immunology well enough. So maybe one day we will understand the immunology well enough to do that. And then the second piece of that about live vaccines is also about your ability to generate an immune response. So if you've got a kidney transplant and I've got all these drugs in your body to keep you from generating an immune response, and then I go, wait, I want to make you generate an immune response to the vaccine, but don't generate that immune response to your new kidney. Don't do that, right? So there will probably be some people that we will never be able to protect.
Which is more important for all of us that can get vaccines should.
Absolutely. At this
Yes.
point, if we can get vaccinated, we should. And again, it shows a love for our neighbors because there are lots of kids who can't get vaccinated.
Absolutely. Well, we have our first question for you, and they thank you for your passion in making the science accessible. And the question is, association is not cause. The science is a no-brainer. But how can all of us fight the culture of mistrust respectfully and urgently? And I believe this person is saying, I'm old enough to remember polio.
Oh, you are? Okay, so somebody remembers iron lungs. Okay, Barbara's
Yeah.
giving me a thumb. Okay, so Barbara will be like, get your kids vaccinated. I know what the complications are of these diseases. And I think actually that's the point. You have real experience, right? So if you have real world experience, share that real world experience. It's hard for somebody to say measles and polio don't cause illness when you go, wait, I know they do. I've seen it, right? So that helps, right? The second piece to me all goes around our responsibility to communicate and educate with integrity. And I talk about common sense science because there are people in the community who are spreading misinformation and disinformation who have more degrees than I ever will.
Hard to do, by the way. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Right.
Yeah, you have the PhD, MBA, MD. I mean, come on.
And they have their own science. So sometimes it's hard to say science fights science, but what does fight misinformation is integrity and shared values, right? And I bet everybody that I'm talking to today has a shared value about protecting children, right? And that's usually the place to start, right? How do I protect my children? How do you protect your children? And you protect your children by vaccinating your children. And that's probably a safer place to start than some conversation about MMR and autism. Right? I still struggle with this every day as a public health practitioner. I'm an old-timey public health person, got into public health by mistake. And if somebody told me what do we need to do, it would always be around disease monitoring. And the honest truth is, the first step for public health needs to be about building trust with the community, right? And you need to build that trust before then you can suggest what interventions you need to do. And so I would use your trusted relationships to spread good information about why vaccines are important.
What do you say to someone that, and thank you, Barbara, for that question. What do you say to someone that says, that particularly we're overwhelming tiny babies with all these inoculations, not only right when they're born, but then at various checkups?
I would tell them that Mother Nature has got you beat in terms of overwhelming tiny babies
I like it.
with all of these microbes and infections. The moment they're born, microbes are busy colonizing their gut and colonizing their skin with millions, hundreds of millions of microbes. And so our 10, 15 vaccines we put in a kid are nothing compared to what Mother Nature is doing to this kid.
That needs to go on a t-shirt, that Mother Nature's got you beat.
Absolutely.
Are there any more questions that anyone would like to ask of Dr. Khan? We have someone that has said, thank you, Barbara. Yes, she's just saying that peace, love, and polio, her students are doing at Wayne State College. Very cool. And she put the flyer in the chat if anyone else would like to know more about that. That's fantastic. If there's no more questions, Dr. Khan, thank you so much for doing this and being a part of our first Believe in Science chat for Common Senses. I know I learned quite a bit during this, and I hope all of our folks did as well. This was recorded, and so this will be available on our YouTube channel. We'll send it to your folks too so that they have it, Dr. Khan. And then it'll be on our website as well, commonsensusfestival.com and .org. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And again, always available for any questions that anybody may have.
And are you back in the USA?
Yes, Barbara, I'm back safe in the USA from Jordan. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your passion.
Thank you very much, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Khan. Have a good day, everyone.